Hello, good morning. This is just to let you all know that we'll be starting shortly. We're just awaiting a couple more panelists to enter the room. Thank you. Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our workshop this morning. As many of you know, the SIDS countries are numerically significant. They comprise 52 nation states and approximately 50 million people, with a massive diaspora community. The representation of this group of nations demonstrates diversity in the IGF debate, with recognition and enhancement of the United Nations 2040 Declaration as the year of small island developing states. SIDS are a particularly vulnerable group, and it's difficult to track development due to lack of inconsistency of data and data sets. As a community, we can benefit greatly from our open data, and our panel will discuss this issue in greater detail. My name is Sindra Suktanan. I'm the chair of the Internet Society Trinidad and Tobago chapter. Before I introduce the panelists, I just want to recognize the presence of some of our SIDS members, Carlton Samuels, Deidre Williams, and Tracy Hackshaw. I also want to apologize for the absence of some of our panelists, particularly from the Pacific. This is because of the recently concluded UN conference on SIDS in Samoa. Just by way of reference, if you'd like to follow the outcome of that conference, in particular SIDS connectivity, ICT for sustainable development, and social development in SIDS relating to health, youth, and women, you can go to www.sids2014.org. So without further ado, I'd like to invite and welcome our panelists. First, we have Keisha Taylor, who is going to speak a bit about SIDS diaspora experience in the UK. Keisha lives in the United Kingdom and is a senior manager, business planning and research at TechSoup Global. She's also the director of the Caribbean Diaspora for Science, Technology, and Innovation in the UK.
Hi, everybody. So basically, as Cynthia said, I work with the Caribbean Diaspora for Science, Technology and Innovation in the UK, and basically what we do is try to connect professionals in this area to support the development of and the participation and employability in areas related to those subjects. Basically, I'm also just about to do a PhD in web science at the University of Southampton, and as part of that I'm going to be looking at some of the areas related to data in small communities. Basically, I will start. So, big data is a term that everybody's using nowadays, but just as important is small data, which is data that you can actually use that's not in the entire ecosystem. So it's data that is a little bit more manageable. And I think that a combination of big data zeroed in with small data could help improve. It could help not just make large smart cities more efficient, but also small islands. And to some degree, small islands is actually more advantageous because they're smaller and because they could use big data in a smaller type way to make more efficient, to make services more efficient. So here I have a few examples of why I think that is the case. So it helps with better resource management in what is sometimes termed micropolitan areas, and that's also related not just to small islands but small communities and small cities and small communities as well. Also smaller could also be smarter, because if you're smaller and you have access to information, it makes it a little bit more easier if the infrastructure is in place to actually develop services, because you're a whole lot more connected with the communities and with the needs of the communities. Also, it's important to use tech infrastructure to understand the flow of capital and resources. And that's one of the things that smart cities initiatives around the world are trying to do. And small island states could also capitalize on this too. It's also important to I think, to have more initiatives that connect small, different islands with each other. So if there's an initiative around open data, it would be brilliant if a small island state could also work on a specific open data or data initiative by partnering with another small community or another small island. And in this case, each community will be able to better learn from each other and develop what they're actually trying to do in a more efficient way. So that's one of the things that I would encourage, a whole lot more partnership between islands, especially with those that have common issues. Also, it's important, I think, there's so much going on in this space and a lot of ideas that are brewing and a lot of services that are developing. I think that SIDS should also learn from those, what's happening elsewhere, and apply that to the work that they do too. For an example of what I think is an interesting area of work that's happening, that's being sponsored by the EC, is the Smart Islands initiative. So basically, this is for Mediterranean states, and of course, these states are connected to European mainlands. And basically, one of the things that it aims to do is to integrate multiple services, whether it be in tourism, fisheries, agriculture, and use the information that and try to harness information and data to be able to make these islands a lot more smarter. So some of the things that they're working on include 3D forest fire management for the environment, 3D smart retailing, which is for commercial purposes, and 3D weather, which is for citizens and government. It's also related to areas in transportation, real estate, and everything else, a whole lot of key areas. And it's hoped they also plan to release a pilot to the Apple Store and for the Android market the project is for 14 Mediterranean islands, including Greece, islands in Greece, related to Greece, Italy, Spain, Cyprus, and Malta. And it's hoped that this will also help encourage tourism development and help avert the effects of the economic crisis. So I thought that was a really great example to cite. They aren't a state per se, but they are being supported by the EC to develop more smart ways using data to enhance services and improve economic development in the region. I thought this slide was a really good example. First for Luxembourg, Ancona, and Poitiers. Those are the three cities that are thought to be the most smart, according to this, and I like how they've divided it up into smart economy, smart people, smart governance, smart environment, smart mobility, and smart living. And what they've been doing there is trying to harness data to better improve services related to each of those areas, but also through finding the connectivity between each of them as well, because they're focusing more on improving the quality of life through looking at all the different areas and working on developing and providing information and data in those areas and improving making Caribbean islands, Pacific islands, African islands much more smart in their services, and capitalizing on the fact that they're small is really important. I think that data has a role to play in helping to push for better infrastructure and better access, because now the two are so closely interrelated. So the diaspora resource, basically, I've put this up here because there's been a really interesting technology called NamSource technology, which in this case, this is an example of a Twitter map, a mapping of the location of Irish-owned Twitter accounts around the world. And basically what they've done here is try to look at how dispersed and how vast the diaspora for Ireland is, and so that is an example of what's been done there. They've been using a special data mining type of thing called omnomastics, and they've also been helping Lithuania to understand the sociology of its diaspora and attract foreign direct investment by data mining Factiva CNE, which is a large database of community directors worldwide. And they've also analyzed PubMed, which is a scientific database that is used by doctors and biotechnology researchers too. And part of the reason they've done that is to help recognize where there's international talent in the diaspora related to needs of the state. And I think that's a really interesting way of using data and information to help gather skills and understand where you could actually help. And diaspora communities are probably more interested in actually funding things, and sometimes funding a little bit risky projects may not be so easily done, whereas the diaspora might want to do that because it's in there, they have a connection with the communities, they have a connection with the island states. So I think that's something that shouldn't be ignored. Because there is a global war for talent, and if the Caribbean doesn't harness their diaspora to help them improve their development, get the talent and the services that they need, or even conversely, I think Caribbean states could also help with diaspora communities and some of the issues that they face. So I think there's a need for collaboration between the two. So here I thought, for an example, there's been the Jamaican Foreign Ministry. They've started this mapping exercise where they're calling for members of the diaspora to participate in an online survey to obtain information about skills that exist in the diaspora. So the Jamaican government, Jamaica itself, could also benefit from it rather than just the countries that the diaspora actually live in. And so that's something that's going on. And also that's kind of the type of things that the group that I work with would also support, because we are really developing a network of professionals in this area that others could actually learn from and would like to contribute. I will skip this slide. So disaster response. I thought I'd put this here as an example because basically, this is a popular example, but I put it there nevertheless. When the earthquake hit Haiti a few years ago, the diaspora was very, very essential in using and providing information and providing crowdsourced information to help in the midst of the crisis. For instance, they helped to crowdsource local hospitals and maps. They helped with translation of Creole into English for those that were giving development assistance. And I mean, as they say, Haitian Creole is only spoken by 12 million speakers worldwide, and 9 million of them actually live in Haiti. So you can imagine the importance of the diaspora to actually get this on the ground when locally people were not able to mobilize themselves. Also, cell connectivity was key. So a lot of this was done via mobile. At one point, services were down, but then they came back up. And if it weren't for that, a lot of lives would have been lost. And yeah, so I just wanted to point that out, that the information, the crowdsourced information was really vital, and the diaspora also played an important role in disaster relief. So open data islands. There's a great research paper by Alan Dix who references small communities. And basically, I like how he's broken it down, because for me, it also relates to small islands. So basically, according to him, it says small islands, data from small island states, we need to find a way to utilize and harness and gather that information, because if there is no information online about SIDS, if there is no easy way to access information about SIDS, that means that SIDS will be invisible and they'll be ignored, because that's the way the world works in this big data environment. People harness data based on what's out there, and it's very easy for communities to be not to be marginalized if their information isn't actually in the ecosystem. So also it's important to have data from the world to SIDS. This is very essential. So information on census data, meteorological data, mapping data is really important if you want to apply for funding or lobbying or negotiation, because data helps to give an example of what is actually required. And then within SIDS, local data is a community asset, because if you have information about your community, you could use that information to help improve and develop services. For instance, in Africa, where with MapKabia, the local community actually made a map of their own community, so much so that they had the better map. They had the only map that existed of their community, which was ignored. And having that map and having it locally owned ensured that the government didn't destroy their community and knock it down because they think it didn't exist. And also having data shared between SIDS, even though it might reside with one community, is also important, because it's part of a larger data set, which becomes even more compelling. So issues, because I know it's time.
No, you have a lot of time.
Okay.
You could go back to that in boxes too, because I think that was important.
Okay. So issues, expertise and resources. this is an area that needs further exploration. Even, I mean, this isn't just an issue for small island states. It's an issue that's relevant globally. For instance, when you look, you hear a lot of people saying, you know, we need so many data scientists for, you know, the next few years. They don't have enough people, not even in the States, to be able to analyze data and to be able to have the skills that are needed. I think that there should be the skills of the future are in STEM subjects, and I think that the Caribbean should be prioritizing those type of subjects to be able to have the skills and the resources that they need to do this. I think that the education system needs to make sure that they push for this, and because if we have a pool of people who actually are really excellent at this, that puts us in a very advantageous position. Also, there's little reusable data flow. I mean, just generally too, there's data, but there's a whole big push to actually reuse data rather than just have data available. And so there's a lot of initiatives from a lot of companies and institutions that are pushing reuse and not just open data. So it's very vital that even if we make data openly available, that people are actually reusing it. There's a great example of engaging offline communities with open data that was done by the World Bank in a small community that's completely offline, and basically that's in Bali and as well as in a small community in Ghana. They had no information available on open data. They don't even have access to the internet, and basically what they did was they gathered local community groups to talk to each other and to explain, you know, the importance of financial data. That was the task. Seeing if these communities would actually be at all interested in open financial data. But the way they've done it, very mixed, very locally driven, gathering community leaders to talk about issues that are of relevance to them. They put it in a framework that was of direct relevance to their everyday lives. And by doing so, they were able to, you know, emphasize the importance of this and also get people to start putting the information online in their marketplaces about, you know, translating the financial data that is provided by the World Bank about these communities in their marketplaces and getting people having discussions around it. And I think that there are innovative ways of engaging in open data reuse, but it's just up to us to be more creative and more community engaged in helping to do so. There's also a lack of, need for network optimization with regard to encouraging a culture of openness and discoverability. And also there's a lack of will for transparency and accountability. But now, I mean, I'm encouraged by seeing that, you know, some of the most closed and undemocratic countries are also now engaging in open data. I won't call names, but basically they've seen from the tech community what's possible, and so they've decided to tap that and to use that in a way that helps them improve their public services. And in the lack of transparency and accountability or willingness towards that, there is possibility for us to also help to drive that by doing it in that kind of way, by emphasizing how it benefits citizens. And once they see that it's important to them, and once they start talking about it, then they get on and they start engaging, and then the government comes on board. It starts with citizens and the tech community engaging with citizens first before government comes on board. And that's the reason why the Open Data Initiative has been successful, a lot more successful, I should say, than people originally thought it would be in such a short space of time. So mobile connectivity and internet connectivity is also limited for some islands. Mobile is, of course, you know, very key, and a lot of what we do relates to that. But of course, it's a challenge if there's different levels of connectivity in different islands, and even within islands, there's different levels of connectivity. But I think that if we start small and if we start doing little things that reap success, then there will be a lot more incentive to, you know, improve the ecosystem within which this works, and, you know, develop, put more investment in infrastructure development too. Also, need for modernized infrastructure and decentralized systems. By making things smarter and on the internet, we make them easily and rapidly locally available in response to aggravated local demand. I just thought that was a great example. Privacy and security is also important. I think that there's a lot that the open data we could learn from the open source community, and a lot more technology also needs to be open source there. Focusing on maximizing the possibilities of data to encourage access and address other IG issues. So seeing data issues as being similar, and in some cases, if not the actual same, to internet governance issues. All the issues related to data relate to internet governance, from access to net neutrality to diversity to infrastructure. They all relate, so I think we shouldn't divorce them. And to conclude, I thought it would be interesting to note that there's a proposal 7 by the GovLab to actually increase transparency of ICANN by using open data and open contracting. And right now they're actually talking a lot about this, and they are there's a proposal that's been submitted for this, and I think that this could also be an opportunity for small island states, because having open data on contracting and sharing information held by the ICANN community, like they've said, information on who gets contracts, what kind of stakeholders are involved, information on the DNS registry data, policy data, strategy data. All of that data could also help smaller communities and underrepresented communities to actually understand how they could better engage and influence what happens in ICANN in a way that's also of benefit to them. So I think it's really important for us to find a way to also engage and support this, because it will only be of benefit to the development of what we are trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Keisha. I really appreciated you citing so many examples, not just from SIDS, but also from developing countries that have already, far advanced in terms of their implementation of open data and the kind of benefits they're reaping from it. I now wish to invite Dr. Patrick Hussain, who is a lecturer at the University of the West Indies and also works within the private sector, particularly for the Trinidad and Tobago Network Information Center, TTNIC. Patrick has also been involved in the development of data.tt, and it's with this in mind that he will give his presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Sintra. So with open data, you have data sources, and you need to place those data sources somewhere in a repository. And then you need to have access to those data sources mainly through web apps or mobile apps. So what I will be talking about is the repository end. Typically, in many countries, the government has taken the initiative to form such open data repository. So, for instance, in the US, you have data.gov, etc. In UK, data.gov.uk. For many of us SIDS, the government has other priorities, and open data has been, at least in our case, given a little bit lower priority. So we took the initiative to start our own repository. This is a joint initiative between the .tt registry, TTNIC, and the Department of Computer Science at the university. The repository, the platform is the surveys is provided by the university through a project called AgriNet, and it is managed. The platform is managed by TTNIC. So we felt that by having this repository, hopefully we would be able to get data sets from multiple sources, not only the government, but also private sector. And by having this repository of data, we would encourage people, students in particular, to develop apps to make use of this data. So far, we have a significant amount of data from the Ministry of Agriculture, and we have apps have been developed for using that data, using information about pricing, what prices are obtained at different markets, etc. We also have data from other institutes within the university. And surprisingly, we have quite a bit of data from Jamaica as well, because they recently had an open data app competition, and they used our platform for that competition. The static data, like spreadsheet data, is maintained on a site called data.tt using an open source platform called CCAN. So this is where you would typically saw data that doesn't change very often. We also have another platform, maps.tt, that we use for geographic data. So this is more useful for when you need to display geographic information. And this one is being heavily used by another project at the university on fisheries. So it has lots of data about locations of markets and et cetera for the fisher folk. We also were interested in providing a platform for real-time data. And we couldn't find such a platform on the internet. So, just a note: the Maps.tt platform is run on something called GeoNode. In the case of real-time data, where you have periodic a periodic data source, we couldn't find something that was suitable for our needs. So one of my students developed such a platform with the appropriate APIs, application interface, etc. This will be used for a couple projects, one of them on smart grids. In Trinidad, the power grid has multiple smart meters, and there's a lot of useful information being generated by those smart meters, and we hope to use this real-time open data platform located at rtod.tt to collect and process and display such data. So we have these three platforms, and hopefully with time we will get more data. And as we get more data, we get more interest in app developers to develop apps for it based on the data. Well, one thing in particular is as you get more data, the ability to develop an app that uses data sources, multiple data sets from independent data sources becomes interesting, because you can combine lots of different information, as well as use geographic, real-time, and static data together. So just to conclude, we have some experience with setting up these repositories, and as I said before, many SIDS have open data as a somewhat lower priority, and in particular, Trinidad and Tobago will be willing to help with those countries who need such help. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hussain. Just going back to what you said about open data platforms, I know St. Lucia does have a government open data platform, and it's unfortunate that Dr. Burton can't join us, because he was intended to speak on that topic. I do have with us, though, Desiree Zachariah. Desiree is part of the technical community, and she resides in Antigua and Barbuda. She's a country-based specialist for Antigua and Barbuda, as well as the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. And St. Lucia is part of the OECS, so she will as well touch on that topic.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to say a little bit about the data that unites us in the OECS. Now, just to give a bit of a background, the OECS, or Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, consists of about 9 countries, and of which 6 of them are independent states. And we make up about 3,147 square kilometers, of which we have a population of about 617,000 people. Our GDP is approximately 8 billion EC dollars, and which is approximately 2.9 billion US dollars. We have a single economic union as of about 2 years ago, and we use a single currency, which is the EC dollar, as managed by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. We have created an OECS assembly, which is responsible for ratifying legislation. So even the ultimate objective, once everything is ratified, is that even though a piece of legislation is not actually passed in an individual country, once it's passed at the assembly, it's passed in the country. It goes in effect in the country, which makes it possible to do so many things without having legal barriers. Now, the government for most of the OECS countries is for all of the OECS countries is the main employer. And as a result, private sector depends very heavily on government intervention. So although the government tries, though, to have partnerships between themselves, private sector, civil society. That is one of the things that is the current trend at the moment. Now, I'd like to look at our experience as it pertains to the IGRIP project, which is the Electronic Government for Regional Integration Project, which started in about 2008 and actively ended in January 31st of this year. Now, the objective of the IGRIP, as mandated by the government, was to increase efficiencies and transparencies of the public sector. That required a number of things. We wanted to have policy and strategy implementation, and we wanted to have our legal regulatory framework in place, so that one of the things we had to do is we had to come up with common legislation. We wanted to ensure that there were common ICT standards and architecture, because if you're dealing with data, and especially big data, we need to make sure that it's easily accessible in a format we can use, and therefore we embarked on that initiative. We wanted to make sure our total cost of ownership optimization was in place, and therefore reporting was essential. We wanted to ensure that our regional e-government institutional framework was strengthened and existing applications could be used more effectively. And we wanted to have a look at automated registries and a multi-purpose ID system, which in itself would have generated a tremendous amount of data, because there's quite a bit of traffic between the OECS countries. So as a result, we looked at strengthening these various systems that we had in the OECS. And one of them was a public financial management system, which we used 2 different programs, really. One of them was Free Balance, and another one, Smart Stream, by our Treasury Department. That generated a tremendous amount of data, and using the necessary ICT standards and architecture, the data could be easily used not only by the central bank, but by our individual governments, by the central bank, and by international agencies for use and analysis to determine the performance of the organizations and the countries themselves. We had tax administration, and which allows us to do online tax payments, and now that has been implemented in 4 of the OECS countries. So that in Dominica, Grenada, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent, and the Grenadines, you have the facility of being able to do online tax payments. Then we have the customs administrations. Now, with a a common economic union, one of the things you need to find out is about the performance of trade. And that the customs information using a single platform allows us to better analyze the data that we have available to us, so that will feed in not only to the OECS trade and its performance, but into the CARICOM, the wider regional CARICOM trade and its performance. That ties in also with the departments of statistics, which require our reporting to them on an annual basis. We implemented what is called the EPPSS, which is Electronic Pharmaceutical Procurement System. And what that does is allows the countries of the OECS, and in this case, all 9 countries of the OECS utilize the EPPSS to be able to to tender for the procurement of pharmaceutical. Obviously, the benefits to that is that you get a more reliable supply at a low cost. So therefore, and that really has benefited our organizations tremendously. And then we have our health and social and productive sectors. Now, the multipurpose ID and its ability to manage the flow of passengers between all of the countries. Now, that has not, the framework is in place, but that has not, the software itself has not been implemented, but there's tremendous benefit for that. So essentially what our e-government project was intended to do is to unify the OECS by creating standards for data and creating applications which would speak to each other so they were interoperable, instead of having a set of applications which might have been self-contained. So therefore, we're able to better understand what the holistic implications of the kinds of trade, the kinds of activities, economic activities, so that when we look at the e-government issues, such as the socio-economic issues, we are better able to get an idea of what actually is happening in our countries. One of the IG issues, at least some of the IG issues just that are being addressed is, as we know, the physical infrastructure. One of the IG concerns is the physical infrastructure, and that's owned by both public and private, privately owned infrastructure. In Antigua and Barbuda, being owned by ACT, which is Antigua Computer Technology, Digicel, the Antigua Public Utilities Authority. We have our the IG legal issues we are addressing through our various policies. Our economic issues, because of our economic union and our similar agriculture, our similar industries, which are primarily agriculture and tourism, we're able to address that readily. Our developmental issues, which we are looking at, for instance, our content through our capacity building, using internet as an engine for growth, content creation, because right now the OECS Secretariat generates quite a bit of content for the OECS, and countries funnel the information through the OECS, which then of course get dispersed as necessary. And issues on human rights, what we do essentially is I would say that we conform pretty much. We don't actively view that as a threat in the OECS, and these socio-cultural issues are easily addressed. What we have found is that the EGRIP project, which started as a project, but we know that it is a program, has helped the OECS countries to unite, especially in the area of forging common relationships having to do with e-governance and e-government in all of the 6 of the 9 countries. That is the 6 independent countries of the 9 OECS countries.
Thank you very much, Desiree, for that extremely detailed and holistic approach towards what the OECS is doing with regards to open data. Next, I'd like to introduce Bevel Wooding. Bevel is going to speak about internet governance supporting the Caribbean open data community. Bevel is speaking on behalf of the private sector. He's an internet strategist at Packet Clearinghouse.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I actually want to follow on from Desiree by indicating several of the advantages that small island developing states have as it relates to data generally that present opportunities in the face of some of the constraints that exist in these size markets and territories. One, of course, is the possibility for open data initiatives to get relatively quick national level and regional level visibility because of the scale and size. Related to that is the whole issue of the fact that projects and initiatives like those that we've heard from Patrick, from Desiree, and from Keisha can be initiated at relatively low costs, particularly when contrasted or juxtaposed against the impact at a societal level. And the third thing that is of particular importance as we discuss how connecting SIDS with access to data is important is the whole issue that pilots or small programs or projects can quickly scale from national to regional level once it has the proper support. And it is this condition, once it has the proper support, that I think is one of the keys to making sure that the connectivity promise is really realized. With any open data or with any data initiative or open data initiative, there have to be a number of actors within the landscape or across the landscape who have to be activated. And I think when we look, if we use the OECS as an example, and you see the effort that has gone into the policy side of things, which is an important and critical aspect, the difference or the gap between the policy dimension and the actual realization of what I consider to be movement from headline projects to an actual data-driven development culture rests on several critical factors. One of those is the availability of a content creation tier that can take the data once it is collected and collated and actually translate it into meaningful applications and services that can be used not just for decision making but also for service delivery, also for research, for innovation catalyzing. And what I have both been involved in and what we are attempting to encourage across the entire Caribbean region and beyond is the development of that tier that deals with the activation component of data initiatives. And within the OECS, within the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, that is taking the form of capacity building programs that attempt to link government's stated intention to have and foster more transparency and accountability, and also to create an enabling environment using technology to translate that into specific activity that brings not just young persons with an interest in application development, but also brings the academic institutions into the fray as it relates to putting a sustainable initiative in place to deal with producing data and identifying needs that can take advantage of available data sets. Now, the interesting thing about this in the context of SIDS is that it can happen with or without direct government support on the onset. Because the data is now more readily accessible, it is possible, and we are seeing, and I'll give some examples, it is possible for organizations in the private sector and within civil society to either create data sets or take advantage of available data sets to create proofs of concept that can then allow governments to understand how and why this is important. A big part of what we have seen across the region is that while you might have some agency or maybe even some ministries with an understanding of the importance of data as both as an economic engine, but also as a social development engine, the knowledge or the notion of how that applies is not always common. And so the best way to communicate that, we have found, has been to put the proof out there. And this proof, unlike larger markets where that proof might take cost or it might take a long period of time, you find that within the region it is possible to have very short-term but high-impact initiatives. One example I want to use comes out of Trinidad and Tobago, where one of the organizations that I'm affiliated with, Bright Path Foundation, partnered with the Trinidad and Tobago TTEITI, Trinidad and Tobago Energy Initiative Transparency Agency. They were responsible for taking energy sector data and presenting it to the public so that it could be scrutinized and so that there can be an open mechanism for the public to understand how energy sector revenues were being collected and how they were being applied. The partnership between Bright Path Foundation and TTEITI involved taking the report, which was actually done in a very traditional manner, create a book and put it out there with tables, and translating that into an open data format that can be interrogated by anyone. And as part of the exercise, we had to attach to it an open data development and application creation program, and also a media awareness and sensitization program. And the idea was simple. The desire to share information is not sufficient to get information out to the audiences that need to have access to it. And so if you have any initiative, whether it is within the bowels of government or whether it is within the private sector, that purports to make data available to the public or to specific audiences, then that has to be attached to a capacity to translate that data into meaningful information and knowledge. And so the link that had to be created, and this link applies even in the initiatives that are coming up in the OECS, is a training, is a media engagement, it is the academic sector involvement, so that the connection between the theory or the promise of data sets as a means for economic activity and transparency can be translated into, oh, this is how it actually works in the real world, and this is how I can use it, and this is how it applies. And that translation process is one of the key enablers. Now I say key, but in addition to the actual activity of getting people together, interfacing with the media, pulling together groups of software developers and so on, of course there is also the necessary component of ensuring that there are champions to carry activities beyond events. And that is to keep the whole data movement in the public space, where public is not just general public. Public is in the ear of government ministers, in the minds of private sector practitioners, in the hearts of young developers and entrepreneurs and innovators who can actually benefit from data sets that connect both internally within countries but also across regions. And so I wanted to leave you with those thoughts about connecting SIDS with access to data. There has to be a who are the champions, who are the sponsors, who are the executors, the coordinators, and the bodies responsible for measurement, but there must be a what is it being used to connect? Is it decision making? Is it public engagement? Is it transparency and accountability? Is it research? Is it innovation? And a lot of times these very simple questions are not treated with sufficiently to allow for the embedding of the culture of openness and data utilization to really get deep inside of practice. And then the last thing is the how, what policy, what education practice, what technology. As you know, there is a lot of work within the Caribbean region around infrastructure, particularly critical internet infrastructure. The region has now close to 9 internet exchange points. Those exchange points allow for the exchange of local traffic, local internet traffic within each jurisdiction. Those exchange points must now be connected to these repositories to allow for that data to be as widely available and as conveniently available as possible to consumers. Thank you.
Okay, so I just want to thank the panel for being so good with time and presenting so succinctly. I now wish to open up questions or comments from the audience? Yes, I see one.
Yes. Is it working? I'm Deirdre Williams, and I'm from the Caribbean. I'm the remote moderator, but this has got not very much to do with that. Yesterday, I was remote moderator for 2 workshops dealing with people with disabilities, and listening particularly to Bevel's presentation, I was wondering how, I wrote it down as how do you get the need for the data to be made public from the bottom up? Because sometimes I'm in communication with it has a very long name, the National Association of and for People with Disabilities in St. Lucia. And they're not very well funded, they're not very well resourced at all. And sometimes I think they're a little timid. Well, let's say they're repressed. And if you got data out in St. Lucia about the number of people who are afflicted with being deaf or being blind, how big is the problem and what could be done about it, this would be a splendid thing. But does somebody at the top have to recognize that and do it? Or is there a pathway for the people at the bottom to start saying, hey, talk about us a little bit more? Thank you.
Sure, and there's a way that goes, Deidre, sorry, that goes directly to what I started off as saying as the benefit of the small island structure. Issues like you raised with whether it is people with disabilities, or let's take another example that is quite current and something that we are looking at actively, the education sector, and the fact that at a raw performance metrics level, it can be concluded that the region is not doing as well as it ought to or as well as it could. That information out in the public space in a non-academic format that allows people to make much more informed conclusions about what exactly is the state of affairs is a key part to moving the political machinery. A lot of times it's very easy to suppress that information. It comes out in hidden reports or in reports that don't get published or distributed very far. And the whole point of getting these in open formats or in interrogatable formats is to allow for other stakeholders to amplify the not just the opinions but the conclusions that are contained and embedded inside of some of these reports. So my response is, from the bottom up, there is actually now more than ever a chance to empower the ground up mobilization of opinion around some of these issues based on fact and based on information that is public information but is hidden from the public through obfuscation, by presenting it in formats and in systems that don't actually ever reach to the audiences that ought to care about it. So it is one great example of how data, when shared effectively or when made available appropriately, can make a huge impact in how policy is shaped, in how action is taken, and how priorities are set.
Okay, there are a couple other panelists that want to also respond to this question.
I'd just like to respond to that, to indicate that, as Bevan indicated, sometimes the data that we see when used can assist us in as we know, setting our priorities. And sometimes what we really need to do are just make small changes, small, very implementable changes. Because just using the OECS again, because that is as the mentioned case, we're talking about a very small environment. And therefore, sometimes it's a matter of just having the right person available to provide the right level of service. But having that information confined to report doesn't help anybody. So what that data does is, if it can be provided so that it's available, so that's easily analyzable, is that it'll allow implementation of just small, very small changes, essentially.
Just one short point. I think that it's a combination of two things. If the citizens need to be able to lobby government to actually get information on certain things that they need, and when they do, great things could happen, because then they will be able to also try to engage the tech community and those that are interested in disability issues to actually modify services. To give one example, the Bristol City Council, they actually released data on information with regards to geographic information, which helped other people develop an app that helped people with mobility issues know where exactly they can and can't go. So just a simple thing like the government doing that, someone saying, okay, this is good, let's just create something that could help us. That's, I think, the way to go. And also, you know, it's also an onus of those that have the disabilities to also try to find ways to get things done and to use information or gather information that's of relevance to them to be able to do that.
In the case of the repository that we started, we've gone around to various organizations and ministries requesting data, and we have been successful in some cases, but in many cases the organizations prefer to have the request sort of sanctioned by the government first before they gave it out. So that tends to be the holdup.
Just before we move on to Tracy's question, I just want to thank you for raising this. It certainly is cross-cutting, not just for disabilities, but also in other areas affecting society, such as gender affairs, women empowerment, etc. So, Tracy, you have the floor. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. This is Tracy Hackshaw. I'm a supporter of open data, very much so. But I'm going to wear my other hat here and say something that kind of leans on what Dr. Hossain just reported on. In relation to data, there's an issue of responsibility and who you give the data to, and so on and so forth, and what kind of data. I'm not aware, and maybe Desiree could probably advise, in which countries is there an approved data classification policy which is able to differentiate between what is public, private, what can be open, what should not be open, and so on. What I'm trying to get at is that, especially in light of recent issues, there could be some challenges with privacy of data, and releasing certain types of data might actually violate certain rights and freedoms of other people and other organizations. So without a proper policy in place, it may be that, and in my day job, I'm wearing the hats that I wear, I have to balance the need to open data and the desire to have that going, along with the responsibility of a government in terms of trying to get the right data out there at the right time and in the right way. So Desiree first, and maybe anybody else, where do you see data classification policies, data protection legislation, freedom of information laws intersecting with these issues, and how, and so not just a question, how can we solve the problem in the cases where those don't exist? So as Dr. Hossain said, you ask governments or you ask agencies and they can't release it. Not because they probably don't want to, so they don't know how, or they don't know what to release. Yeah?
Essentially, what we're having is that traditionally, the Department of Statistics has the control of any kind of data and the release of national data. Now, that's a big question. what data do we release and what amount of it do we release. Now, if you're talking about sensitive data, especially when you have one or two actors, you really can't release that particular type of data without it being aggregated. When you have small, let's use an example of trade data. If you have a major player, in let's suppose in Antigua and Barbuda, you have a major player, a major trader in that country. Releasing that data, if that's a single trader, it's releasing information about that particular trader, which it can't be done, because essentially it exposes that trader to its competitors. But what you do is you release that data aggregated with the rest of the OECS. And when I say the specific countries, Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, Nevis, St. Vincent, plus the dependent countries, Montserrat, the BVI, and Anguilla. Okay, so by releasing that data in aggregate form, then it then gives the trader the necessary protection. Now, determine what kind of data you can release. Now, you look at hospital data from a hospital information system. It's okay. There are times you have to release data concerning maybe trends. What day is the best day? What kinds of times is the hospital engaged? What are the peak times? That helps the physician in charge to determine the number of physicians possible, etc., etc. You talk about things like what kind of illnesses that you have in a country, so that the necessary health departments, health ministries can better plan. So there are certain things, and generally the school of thought is that you release data which is not sensitive, obviously, but then who determines what is sensitive and what is not sensitive? And it depends from one country to the next. And essentially, the basic classification of sensitivity is if it is going to negatively impact on a particular function or a particular individual, then it's best if it's released in aggregated form rather than in disaggregated form. So for instance, in Antigua and Barbuda, the medical benefits scheme, which is the provider of quite a bit of financed health services, need to know the kinds of illnesses and the number of persons, let's suppose, with the lifestyle diseases such as diabetes and coronary, exactly, high blood pressure, those kinds of things. Using the information that comes from the clinics as well as from National Hospital, they have been able to come up with a good idea, and then they publish this information, which is then used both locally, nationally, and regionally for better planning. So then this information then ties into the procurement of the necessary drugs for the Antigua and Barbuda, and then it's compared to the kinds of procurements that you need for the other countries as well, so that you can look at what are the lifestyles in Antigua and Barbuda which are negatively impacting, and what can we do vis-a-vis what is happening in Dominica, what's happening in Grenada, what's happening in St. Lucia. And if we find that Antigua's statistics show that we need to make certain lifestyle changes, and that's one of the things that is done. And in fact, in Antigua and Barbuda now, that statistic has empowered the medical benefits scheme to start various programs in improving lifestyles. So you have several national walks. You see, there's been an encouragement of persons who, on any given day, you find hundreds of persons going out and walking. Now that program has been adopted by several other countries as well, because it's working. The number of instances, the hospital is probably seeing a lot more instances of persons coming for certain communicable instances. And just to add there, what has happened, I know at one of the hospitals, is that one of the particular in the dialysis unit, one of the physicians who is responsible for the dialysis unit has indicated that what he wants to get is data on people who are predisposed to needing dialysis, kidney failure, because it is just so costly. Now, if he identifies the people who are at high risk for diabetes plus the people who are at high risk for high blood pressure, those two sets of people will allow him to target first and implement preventable methods, which means that the cost of providing dialysis will go down, and health costs in general will go down.
So,
Tracy, I agree with you fully about data policies, etc. We do have data policies on our website, and we these were generated, after consulting multiple stakeholders, etc. But what the data we've been requesting from organizations, we've been specific because we didn't want to get into too much legal issues. We've been just requesting data that is already public. Okay, the only difference is that it's not available electronically. So they may have a booklet or something with a table, or in the case of agriculture data, which we now get from the Ministry of Agriculture, all of it is available on their website, but it wasn't displayed enough. We could go and scrape it, but it was too messy. So they just provided the same data directly to us. So yes, so we've been keeping it simple so far, just requesting data that is already publicly available.
Quickly, I just wanted to say that it's a little bit, it is difficult to reconcile this, because, the more information you put out there, the more likely you become individuals become identifiable. But I do think that, and I think that, like, when this whole open data movement first started, privacy was not one of the issues that was discussed at all. All it was doing is, we're going to try to get information and be able to build apps and services around it. But now there's a lot of groups and, even government initiatives that are looking at the ethical implications of open data as well. And I think that as we, the Caribbean, develop it and start doing things, we do need a policy, but it will need to be adapted and, adjust based on how things go, and we will have to learn as we go as well. Because there could be unintended consequences to putting information out there. One of the most popular examples was the community in India that, especially if your community knows nothing about it, they put information out there about land ownership, and basically what happened was that a lot of rich people were able to exploit people and take their land away from them because they had that information. So I do think that, we will need to learn as we go. We will also need strong civil society involvement in any kind of processes, not just from the government.
Yes, to answer Tracy, there's a little bit of a tension in the legal environment. Some of our countries don't have data protection law, but everybody have access to information law. And the Access to Information Law is in tension with the Official Secrets Act. And everywhere across the Caribbean, there's a British-style Official Secrets Act that is still in play. And because there's been no reconciliation between the Access to Information Act and the Official Secrets Act, the tension remains. That is why one of the reasons you get from some government agencies, give us the data, they tell you, well, we can't because the Official Secrets Act says something, until you remind them there's an Access to Information Act. The other problem that you have is the way it is administered. Typically, Access to Information Act is administered out of the Information Ministry or the Office of the Prime Minister. And the Official Secrets Act rests in the Ministry of National Security and so on. And the two sets of bureaucrats don't talk to each other, and they don't see how this thing comes up. Dr. Zin mentioned the fact that agricultural data is available from Jamaica, and that's the low-hanging fruit, because just about everybody take it that agricultural data is available, and it's quite right. It's available. It's there. It's not been machine readable and accessible, so it was not a big step to move agriculture data into the realm. The other thing that you might want to consider is the regulatory agencies collect a lot of data. And I've been having an ongoing argument with the Office of Utilities Regulation, which is a regulator about traffic, telecoms traffic, telephone traffic data. The law compels them to capture traffic data. The law also compels them to share the data for public consultation. But getting them to make the data available in a way that is transparent and readable is always a challenge. I will tell you that if you try to find the traffic data on the OUR website, you can go ahead and try, but it's going to be very difficult for you to find it. But you can ask directly somebody and remind them what the law compels them to do, and they'll send the traffic data to you. It might not be in a format that you can easily use and so on. So there are those two issues, and Desiree came up with one of them. It's also good for you in all of these open data initiatives to have a way to demonstrate the value associated with having the data. And maybe you have to go anonymize data in some instances and use the aggregation of the data to give people comfort that you're not sharing personal information privately. But oftentimes I find an open data initiative works well when you can actually demonstrate from somewhere the value of having that open data and what the knock-on outputs are from processing that data.
Okay, thank you, Carlton. I'd just request the panelists just to respond and as well give their closing remarks since we're pressed on time. Starting with Bevel.
I do want to respond to or continue on what Carlton was saying. I made the point about the initiatives in small island states being relatively low cost in terms of implementation. The note I had that I didn't say earlier that I'll say now is that but much effort is required because you do find in a number of cases, actually in the majority of cases, data that is supposed to be or that can be reasonably defined as public data is withheld from the public for one reason or the other, sometimes behind obscure arcane acts, other times simply behind the fear that if this came out, my ministry, my government may be embarrassed or compromised in some way. And to me, one of the big steps in moving from the low-hanging fruit, easy applications into that culture of openness is to prove the utility of openness and to prove the utility of data sets that are made available to as wide a public as possible in an opener format as possible. And I think that really is where the challenge and the effort of the next phase of this movement lies, in proving the value proposition for data sets made available to as wide a public as possible. Thank you.
One addendum I'd like to make to my presentation is that in the OECS we have a statistical act which pretty much defined how data is to be disseminated. What I'm not aware of is that there is a lot of instances where data that should be provided, at least from at the collection source, is not provided. What I know is that, but at the agency source is not provided. I know at the collection source, often you can't get the information. So you ask for input and you don't get that information. And of course, the agency responsible for normally for collecting that is the Department of Statistics. Now, we don't often have, just because of the structure of the countries in the OECS, we don't normally have civil society who normally goes out and get that information. They will collect it generally on an ad needs basis. But when we look at the departments of statistics and what they collect, they normally, as far as I'm aware, publish it in the required format. However, what they do, though, is maintain the privacy of that data. But using the initiatives for the standardization of the data, for the distribution of the data, for it being available in electronic format, and for having it available online so that it can be used by anybody, is one of the things it is one of the things that the OECS has been involved with. And in fact, when it comes to economic data, the central bank has taken quite a bit of ownership of that, and it's normally readily available. When it comes to health data, you normally are able to get that from the various departments of statistics. When it comes to data which will compromise particular individuals, you'll find yourself in a position where you may not be able to get it, not because it's not available, but because there are certain constraints. Now, one of the things I will say, though, is that sometimes the public may not be as readily aware of the value of that data, and hence may not be demanding it as readily as they should. But I'm not aware of times when it's demanded that it cannot be, and it's available, that it is not provided.
So yes, reuse is very important. I feel like, I've been monitoring how the whole data discussions has been going on for quite some years now, and now we've moved on from making data openly accessible to reuse, and I think those two need to be tied together. If you make data available, who's to say that's what people actually want? You need to make data available that people actually would like to have. So I think that it's important to build awareness and talk about data in practical terms. So when people think data, they hear mathematics and they hear statistics and Excel spreadsheets, and they think, oh, that's not for me. But as the example I gave earlier about that World Bank project in Bali, you can't help develop it in communities that aren't as technical savvy, and it may actually make them become more interested in learning new skills and developing new things. In closing, I'd also like to say I think it's really interesting to see what the UN is also doing. They've called for a data revolution post the Millennium Development Goals, and so right now they're discussing how exactly they're going to use data in progressing development, and they're looking at how how data could better improve or include people and gender equality among gender and all of that type of stuff. So I think it's developing, and to see that the UN is also taking this on board is encouraging.
One thing we didn't touch on is Internet of Things, IoT. With IoT, we'll have a flood of data available to us, and this whole open data issue will become even more important, because it now becomes important as to how we anonymize, aggregate, collect, disseminate data. Say for instance, at some point in time you have real-time health information from every citizen. How do you make use of that without affecting privacy issues, etc.? So I think open data will become even more important as we start having all these sensor networks and smart grids and smart cities, etc. Thanks.
Okay, so from the debate, we can conclude that the data that results from internet access and mobile connectivity can aid better policy and programs to help SIDS improve internet governance and resiliency in their countries. I just want to thank the members of the panel for their thoughts and thank the audience for your interest, and bring the session to a close.